When Karoline Leavitt sat down for that interview, she expected a debate. What she didn't see coming was a moment so explosive, it would take down one of the most recognizable TV hosts overnight. And it all happened live, not in some pre-recorded segment where producers could jump in, edit things out, or smooth over the rough edges. No, this was raw, unfiltered, and playing out in real time. Karoline had been invited onto the Morning Current, a political talk show notorious for sharp debates and even sharper hosts. Sitting across from her was veteran journalist Paul Danning, a man who had built his career on pushing buttons. His interviews? Aggressive. His style? Relentless. He wasn't just there to moderate, he was there to win. And today, his opponent was a young, rising conservative voice who had no intention of backing down. At first, the segment went as expected. Paul pressed Karoline on media bias, accusing conservative outlets of spreading misinformation, while insisting that networks like his were simply setting the record straight. Karoline countered with facts, listing instances where mainstream news had distorted stories, omitted key details, or outright misled the public. It was tense but still professional. Then something shifted. Paul leaned in, his expression tightening. His once measured tone turned sharp. He wasn't debating anymore, he was attacking. People like you, he said, frustration creeping into his voice, are the reason this country is backsliding. You push this fake narrative of victimhood, pretending conservatives are being silenced, when in reality, you're the one silencing everyone else. The studio went silent. Karoline blinked, her posture still poised, but there was a sharpness in her gaze. She had handled tough interviews before, but this was different. She let the moment linger before responding. Excuse me? Paul didn't retreat. If anything, he doubled down. You act like free speech is under attack, but what you really want is control. Your people. He stopped himself, but it was too late. The damage was done. The energy in the studio changed instantly. Producers, who had been passively watching, exchanged glances. Crew members stiffened. And Karoline? She didn't raise her voice. She didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. Would you like to clarify what you mean by your people? The tension could be cut with a knife. Paul hesitated for just a second, but a second was all it took. The cameras were rolling and the internet was watching. Paul Danning was a man who had always controlled the conversation, steering it wherever he wanted. But this time, he had lost his grip. The moment those two words, your people, left his mouth, something shifted. It wasn't just a poor choice of words. It was the implication behind them. The kind of phrase that would be dissected, replayed, and debated 1,000 times over. And Karoline knew it. She leaned back, folding her hands in her lap, giving him the space to either fix his mistake or sink deeper. Paul inhaled sharply. I meant conservatives, he said too quickly. People like you, who push an agenda of grievance instead of progress. Karoline tilted her head slightly. So, just to be clear, she said, her tone steady, when you said your people, you were referring only to political ideology? Paul's lips pressed into a thin line. He had been in this game long enough to recognize a trap when he saw one. If he pushed back, he risked confirming what many were already thinking. If he admitted it was a mistake, he'd look weak. So he shifted the goalposts. Oh, come on, Karoline. Don't play the victim here, he scoffed, forcing out a dry chuckle. This is exactly what I'm talking about, this bad faith outrage. You know exactly what I meant, but instead of engaging with the actual argument, you'd rather twist my words and make it about you. Karoline didn't flinch. I don't need to twist anything, Paul. Your words speak for themselves. For the first time, something flickered across his face. Irritation? Regret? Maybe both. But he was in too deep now, and there was no turning back. So he made the fatal mistake. You know what? Maybe if conservatives spent less time playing the victim and more time actually contributing something to society, we wouldn't be having this conversation. There it was. A blanket statement. Delivered with arrogance. Live. On air. The silence that followed was suffocating, not just in the studio, but on the other side of the screen, where thousands, soon to be millions, were watching. Even Paul seemed to realize at the moment the words left his mouth. His lips parted, as if to soften the blow, but it was too late. Karoline let the words hang for a moment before speaking. Are you saying conservatives don't contribute to society, Paul? He exhaled, rolling his shoulders back. I'm saying this constant whining about being cancelled is exhausting. Karoline simply nodded, her expression unreadable. But her silence? It said everything. The damage had been done. Within minutes, the clip exploded across the internet. A 15-second snippet of Paul Danning's words. Maybe if conservatives spent less time playing the victim and more time actually contributing something to society, spread like wildfire. No context. No prelude. Just that sentence. Within an hour, hashtags started trending. Hashtag Paul Danning. Hashtag media bias exposed. Hashtag Karoline was right. Some saw it as outright disrespect. Others rushed to defend him, claiming it was taken out of context. But the full-length clip? It didn't help his case. If anything, it made it worse. By midday, 3 major advertisers for the Morning Current had pulled their sponsorships. By evening, 5 more followed. The network was in full-blown damage control. And Karoline? She didn't have to say a word. She simply retweeted the clip, with nothing but a thinking face emoji. But the storm was far from over. Inside NBS News, the network behind the Morning Current, executives were scrambling. The outrage wasn't fading, it was growing. Viewers were bombarding them with emails. Advertisers weren't just pausing their partnerships, they were cutting ties completely. An emergency meeting was called. By 3 p.m., an official statement was released. Paul Danning has been placed on indefinite suspension while we conduct an internal review of yesterday's broadcast. NBS News remains committed to respectful and fair journalism. Translation? We're waiting to see how bad this gets before we throw him overboard. But the internet wasn't patient. A suspension wasn't enough. People wanted him fired. And Karoline? She wasn't leading the charge, but she wasn't stopping it either. That night, she appeared on another show. When asked directly, "Do you think Paul Danning should be fired?" she paused, then said, "I think people in positions of influence should be held accountable for their words." Strategic. Devastating. The next morning, NBS News made their final decision. At 9:15 a.m., they announced, effective immediately, Paul Danning is no longer affiliated with NBS News. We thank him for his years of service and wish him the best in his future endeavors. And just like that, Paul Danning was gone. But the conversation? It was just getting started. Was this justice, or cancel culture gone too far? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that make you think.